The first time the coyote spoke with my brother's voice, I was standing in the dark outside the trailer, holding a flashlight that had already begun to die. It was 3 nights after Thomas disappeared. The police had taken the report, asked the usual questions, and left. People vanish out here. The reservation is large, the land older than any of us, and sometimes a man simply walks away and does not come back. That is what I told myself while I waited for the battery to fail completely. The coyote stood at the edge of the cottonwoods, just beyond the reach of the weak yellow beam. It was larger than it should have been, the way animals sometimes look larger when they know you are watching them. Its mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not a yip or a howl. It was Thomas's laugh, the short, surprised one he made when someone told a joke he had not expected. I did not drop the flashlight. I did not run. I simply stood there while the laugh faded into the ordinary night sounds of wind and insects. When I finally swept the beam across the trees again, the animal was gone. The next morning, I found tracks circling the trailer. They began as coyote prints, 4 toes, clear claw marks, and then, without transition, became the bare footprints of a man. The man prints were the same size as Thomas's. I measured them against an old boot of his that still sat by the door. Perfect match. I did not tell anyone. Speaking of such things is not done lightly. The old people say the word itself can draw attention, so I kept quiet and began locking the doors at dusk, something we had never bothered with before. On the 4th night, the voice came from the roof. It was Thomas again, speaking calmly, the way he used to when he was trying to talk me out of a bad idea. "Come outside," it said. "I found a way back. It's cold up here." The voice moved as it spoke, pacing the length of the trailer. I heard the soft scrape of something heavier than a man, something that did not care about the slope of the metal. When I finally forced myself to open the door and shine the light upward, there was nothing, only the empty roof and the stars. I began sleeping with the lights on. The dream started on the 5th night. In them, I saw Thomas kneeling in a dry wash under a moon that was too large. He was cutting something from his own arm, long, careful strips of skin, and laying them aside the way a man prepares hides. When he finished, he stood and pulled a different skin over himself, one that still had the face of a coyote attached. The eyes in that face were human. They looked directly at me and did not blink. I woke with the taste of dust in my mouth and the certain knowledge that the dream had not been entirely mine. By the 7th day, the livestock had begun to act wrong. The goats refused to leave the pen. The dog, an old cattle dog that had never shown fear of anything, pressed itself against the door and would not stop trembling. When I forced it outside, it ran in tight circles, snapping at the air, then bolted into the desert and did not return. That evening, I drove to my aunt's place. She is one of the few who still knows the old ways without speaking of them carelessly. I did not use the word. I only described the tracks, the voice, the dream. She listened without expression, then rose and locked every window in the house, even though the sun had not yet set. "Do not answer it," she said, "no matter whose voice it uses. Do not look it in the eyes when it is wearing an animal. And if you see a person who moves the way an animal moves, too smooth, too quiet, you walk the other direction and you do not look back." I asked her what it wanted. She was quiet for a long time. "It already has what it wanted," she said. "The first kill. The rest is just hunger and the pleasure of watching someone break." I stayed the night at her house. In the early hours, I heard something large walking around the building on 4 legs, then rising onto 2. It scratched once at the door, lightly, almost politely, and spoke in my mother's voice, which was impossible because my mother has been dead 11 years. "I left something for you," it said, "under the steps." In the morning, there was a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. Inside were 3 long strips of dried skin and a lock of hair that was the exact color of Thomas's. I burned it in a coffee can with white ash mixed into the flames, the way my aunt instructed. The smell was worse than anything I have ever known. 2 nights later, the thing came into the trailer while I slept. I woke to the sound of breathing that was not mine. The room was dark except for the thin light from the bathroom. Something stood in the doorway. It had Thomas's shoulders and the shape of his head, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, the way it held itself balanced on the balls of its feet as though ready to drop to all fours. When it turned its face toward me, the eyes reflected the light the way an animal's eyes do. It smiled with my brother's mouth. "You kept looking," it said, and the voice was almost kind. That was enough. I reached for the rifle I had started keeping loaded beside the bed. The thing did not move to stop me. It only watched, head tilted, while I chambered around. When I fired, the flash lit the room for an instant. In that instant, I saw that the skin it wore was not seamless. There were places where it did not quite fit, where something older and wrong showed through the seams. The bullet struck, the figure staggered, then dropped to its hands and feet with a sound like wet cloth folding. It ran for the open door on all fours, moving with a speed no coyote has ever possessed. I fired again as it crossed the threshold. Something dark sprayed across the porch boards. I did not follow it. In the morning there was blood on the steps, but the trail ended after 20 yards as though the ground itself had closed over it. No tracks, no body, only the quiet and the ordinary desert light. I still hear it some nights. Sometimes it uses Thomas's voice. Sometimes it uses mine. It never comes as close as it did that night in the trailer, but I know it is still out there, wearing whatever skin it needs, waiting for the moment I answer. The old people say once a person chooses the witchery way, there is no returning. The first killing breaks something that cannot be mended. After that, the only thing left is the walking, on 2 legs or 4, in whatever face will open the next door. I keep the lights on, I do not answer, and when the coyotes call from the cottonwoods with voices that almost sound human, I close the curtains and pretend I cannot hear my own name in their mouths.